Hey everybody, I'm Pooch Van Druten, and that is
Chris Rabold, and I am not at home for this one.
Chris Rabold from remote, somewhere in America.
Mobile.
Chris Rabold in America in a hotel room. That's scary. Did you
like he used to always be?
Was it like hermetically sealed? Did it have a seal on the door when you showed up?
It did have a some sort of Lysol branded sticker. You know, neither of us have not done this already during COVID, but it is it's such a bummer experience. It just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, it's weird. And to me, at least the one time that I've stayed in a hotel, or a couple times that I stayed in the hotel since COVID, like nobody's at the hotel either. So it makes it feel like ghost town.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, it amplifies the weirdness of it all. And the hustle and bustle of the lobby or the people watching is not quite there.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, anyway, here we are. Sometimes we're going to be coming at you remote from places. Hopefully we do a lot of that more often.
Totally.
Coming up soon. So anyway, this is episode 43. What would you like to talk about, Chris?
Let's do something that's been mentioned a few times. People are wanting to know what we do, how we do when we're out of our comfort zone, so to speak, whether that's, I think they really mean musically is what they're saying. Like you find yourself in a new genre or with a new assortment of instruments, something like that. You know, what do we do?
Yeah, that's a great one. So I think specifically, let's talk about music types first. I know that both you and I have kind of crossed weird lines. You've mixed some country, you've mixed some pop, you've mixed some rock. As you know, front of house engineer for some really large bands, and I've been lucky enough to kind of do pop and rock and walk this weird line. But like, what happens like when you show up to a music genre that you don't know anything about? You know, I mixed a reggae band in my early days, and was doing like reggae festivals and stuff, and like it's a totally different balance.
It's not the kick drum anymore.
That's right. It's like what is important for that genre. Because you could show up and mix reggae like a rock band, and people would just be like, "What is wrong with you?"
Totally.
And so if I know that I'm going to be placed in a weird position like that, like I definitely study prior to going. So like if someone calls me up and says, "Hey, you're going to a reggae festival and you're mixing like 4 bands," the first thing I would do for like a week is listen to, stream reggae shit to get a vibe of what's important. Because, let's take reggae, for example. Reggae is all about the bass guitar and moving sub information, but not kick drum. Like kick drum's there, but it's all about, that. And then the offset instruments, the keyboards and the guitars, the guitars are always on the up.
Right.
And then the keyboards are not on the up. They're the downbeat and the in-betweens. And there's a fine line between that stuff. And if you don't have the balance right of that mix, it doesn't sound like reggae. It's not, what's been your experience? Like when were you thrown into the fire? When was something where you were like, oh my God?
I'll tell you where I find myself getting, I don't want to say thrown into the fire routinely, but one that throws me for a loop is, in this gig, this thing that I'm doing here has this in there, is whenever there are any orchestral, big band, any kind of acoustic instruments, like aside from, an acoustic guitar with a D, I'm not talking about that,
Yep.
And the reason that it throws me off, not that it throws me off, but that it gets me on my toes more than anything is 9.99 times out of 10, whoever is playing that instrument is a badass.
Totally.
And you know what I mean? And these are professionals. These are like super pros.
Yep.
And whereas I might get a gig to go mix whatever rock band, I could walk into, like, I don't know what I'm going to run into, but really the chances are it's going to be not what I'm describing more times. You know what I mean? And it's going to be like, oh, there's your amp. Cool. Here's a 57 and a blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's mindless. It goes back to the days in the clubs when we started, and it's simple, and it's, the bar is set where it's set. And, you know, once we start getting into these gigantic, 50-piece orchestras or 75-piece, or just all of these things with these players that are used to performing with their local Philharmonic, for example, or whatever, the last thing you want to do is show up and be Johnny Kick Drum sound guy. You know what I mean?
Exactly right.
So even on the plane for this one, I'll be honest with you, I'm Googling, and I've done it all. I've done these things before, but I need the primer. And thank God for the internet / take it all with a grain of salt. I'm Googling miking, and then you name the instrument. And then there's the close miking of it, and then there's the section miking of it, because be prepared to be able to do either. You want to be flexible. You know, when they say, no, we do this, you don't want to go, but I think you mentioned something about asking. I too, though, if it's someone, I don't know, it's a cello or something, and we're close miking it for a live performance, I'll ask them, hey, where do you usually go from? You know, they might have a preference, or they might. And if you do it with confidence, not in the like, gosh, golly, what is that thing? You'll get some feedback. So to answer your question, that's the place where it throws me, where I feel the most like, oh boy, I really need to have my shit together. And that's purely just on the mechanics of the miking. That's before we even get to the artistry of the mixing and the layering of the instruments. Does it make sense? Yeah,
exactly right. Because, oftentimes we run into a giant orchestra, let's say, like I'll speak from experience here. When I was 30 years old, I was mixing Kiss, and they decided that they wanted to do a concert in Sydney with the, in Sydney, in Melbourne, with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, a 60-piece orchestra, and the rock band Kiss. And this was before, before digital consoles. I had like 3 XL4s, I think. And that was with submixes of the orchestra coming back to me. So that wasn't like I didn't have individual things. I had someone else in a truck sending me submixes of orchestra, luckily. But that was an experience for me where I was like, here I am 30 years old, and it's like, I have never put a microphone in front of some of these instruments, Right. And it was exactly what you said. It was like, luckily I was working with this guy, Angus. I forget his last name right now. Sorry, Angus. In Australia, who had mixed orchestra things. So luckily I had a guy to kind of, bounce off of. But still, I was making decisions because that all had to work together with the rock band. And so we were doing close miking, and then, sections. And yeah, I mean, that's all I can tell you to do is, if you come up to an instrument that you've never mic'd before, the first thing that I do is walk around the instrument, listen to, I'll even like say to the guy, hey, I'm going to be putting my ear like real close to your instrument because I want to hear like what's going to sound the best. And same thing that I do with like an electric guitar. You got to be careful about putting your head into a 412 cabinet. But if you tell the guy, hey, I'm going to put my head in here, just be careful. Same thing though, like with the cello, for example, you said that example about a cello. I will listen to where stuff is. And then just like you said, have a conversation with the guy and be like, hey, where in the past have they put a microphone on you? And where do you think your instrument sounds the best? And you'd be surprised what the answer will be, and you'll end up with a better result. I guarantee it, because these are all pros that know where their instrument sounds good. But yeah, man, that was an experience, let me tell you. But dude, a symphony 60-piece symphony orchestra at like 105 A weighted.
Oof.
Pretty rad.
Oh, I'm sure.
I gotta say.
I'm sure that sounded phenomenal because the end result is always killer. And I don't think I've ever gotten quite that loud with one.
Yeah. I think it was probably when Kiss was in there all together with the orchestra. Right. There were moments of 105. But I mean, dude, it was a big rock show in a giant soccer stadium, and it was, you know, stacks and stacks of JBL boxes. You know, I mean, it was 102 for most of the time.
And that's the ultimate of like riding the razor's edge of feedback. Only it's not just a vocal that might come back. It's some weird low end, whatever, you know. And you mentioned that was like that particular examples before digital consoles. Thank God now with digital consoles, we can group everything. You can EQ at the group level. You can do so much to prevent
so much more. I would have had so much better tools.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, it was like with that many open microphones on stage, the stage becomes almost microphonic, right?
Yes.
So you have to like, you do have to do some things to try to make that work, and high pass filter up a little bit higher than maybe you want to. But maybe not for particular instruments, you know, to prevent the whole thing from being, you know, taken off on you. But yeah, man, it was a real juggle. But you know, 20 years later now, 22 years later now, it's still like, you know, something that I'm very proud of. Like it was an amazing show.
I bet.
The
last big, just made me think, the last big. And it's so funny, even as I sit here and I talk to you, because it's just not in, I get tired of this phrase, it's just not in my wheelhouse. I even have to check myself on my terminology. I'm like, sort of symphonic, orchestral, what's the right terminology? But the last anything like that I did was at NAMM a couple years ago. And there was like, it came out really well. I was proud of it. It's on a console I didn't know, blah, 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 blah. But there is some ego testing moments, for example, at the very beginning of the show too. We had like one rehearsal day and then we had the show, and it's at NAMM. Right. So everyone there's, you know.
Yeah. Checking your shit out. Like, oh.
And I got the call on the ClearComm, and it was like, hey, do you hear that 80 Hertz? Do you hear that at the beginning? And I'm like, nope. Sure as fuck don't hear it at all. I mean, I was just dead honest.
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't. Whatever's, I know, I'm sure it's there, and I'm not going to tell you I hear it because I don't right now. Yeah. I'm like, but I believe you, and I know of a few different places it would probably be coming from, and I, you know, sourced it at wherever. It was the same deal. It was a high pass and a cut and a notch and a finagle it. So it's like, you know how it is, God, we've forgotten all about that with live shows where you take the hit, where your ego takes a hit during the middle of the show. It's like, you got to shake that shit off and go, you know?
That's exactly right. Like I still have nightmares about, I did a Katy Perry gig for New Year's in a giant ballroom at the Steve Wynn Hotel. And they put me all the way back in 3 tiers of shit. Like I was all the way by where the front doors opened into this giant ballroom. And you know, monitor engineer during the show keeps calling me. He's like, dude, there's like this 80 Hertz, you know, anything you could do about it. And dude, I was literally
same deal. You didn't hear
4 rings of tiny flown little satellite speakers back. You know, I can't hear 80, you know, taken off a mile away, you know,
and not even taking off, just like humming.
No. Yeah. Just sitting there enough that it was shaking the stage and it was bothering her. She was like, oh, why does the stage feel uncomfortable?
Oh, that
you know,
hurts
and
my
I was
heart
like,
just to hear.
Oh my God. And I still have nightmares about it. I'm still remember like for like 30 minutes of the show, and it was a little long show, like 2-hour show, of me just, you know, paging through inputs with headphones, trying to find like what's going on. Taking high pass filters and destroying sounds of things just to try to get rid of it.
Right.
Yeah, that sucks, dude. There's nothing worse.
It's almost like be careful what you wish for as I hear this, because it's like someone calls you because you're supposedly a badass. Yeah. You can come in, work with this high-end client. You probably had no time.
No time.
No time. They're like, you're good, right? And I'm like, No, I'm not fucking good.
I'm just here like
but
barely making it, dude. We're barely making it. Yeah.
But I'll do it. And then, you're, especially if you get that call, like it's bothering her. So you're like, oh shit, there goes my, he was the best I ever had moment. Now, and then it's like, that's not what it's about right now. Just get through it.
As weird and, I'll go off on a tangent here just a little bit. The weirdest thing ever happened to me where Steve Wynn and like about 20 people that all looked like badass bodyguards.
Oh God.
Start walking towards me as I'm mixing during a sound check. Like they're like walking towards me. I'm all the way in the back and I'm like, what the fuck? And I go, oh, and I knew what Steve Wynn looked like. And I go, oh, that's Steve Wynn, whatever. So he walks up and he starts talking to me in the middle of this, and it's relatively loud, whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll mute everything. Yeah. And I reach out my hand and I go, hi, how you doing? I'm Pooch. And he totally left me hanging, dude. Like wouldn't shake my hand. I was like, okay, how you doing, man? What's going on? Left me hanging. But the reason I tell you that story is that with her being a little bit upset about that happened, when he went back to her after the show, this was his New Year's party. Mm-hmm. He said
I've done one of his New Year's shows before.
Yeah, he said to her that he's like, that's the best I've ever heard anyone sound here.
There you go.
So, but I pissed her off. So,
yeah.
You see, I'm not working for Katy Perry right now, right?
Right. Who did I have one time? Tangent time. I was at Radio City Music Hall with Widespread Panic, and that's the kind of place they play a lot, that size venue or whatever. And this wasn't early in my career. They were established. I was established as a mixer. I knew what the hell I was doing. We'd been in that room with them before and had success. And for some reason, out of nowhere, the promoter, Ron Delsner, comes like cruising up to me, not happy.
Oh, shit.
And like, I'm not accustomed to
me either. Like getting yelled at. Like what?
And I was it was so like, what the fuck is happening right now? Like it was, I don't even remember what the deal was or what the complaint was, or it was definitely one of those where I was like, God, I did not enjoy that.
Yeah. No.
And this is all the things we want to get back to, right?
Yes. Why do we want to keep doing this?
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
Because of those nights when it's amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I hope that by us sharing those moments with you guys is that, there are moments in my career that I look back on that were just unbelievable moments of hair raising and people looking at me like going, holy crap, dude, that sounds like amazing, but there are plenty of moments of me going, holy crap, what a night. Like, I know that at the end of that night, I was just like, tail between the legs, walking back to my room at the wind, just going, oh man.
So beaten.
But anyway, kind of back on topic here, not only orchestras are hard, but also genres. Like we started talking about how reggae is or whatever. But like if someone asked me to mix, like, let's say Indian music, for example, like I wouldn't know. If you asked me right now and told me tonight I'm going to mix an Indian act, I would have no idea what's supposed to be the prominent thing in that mix. Would you?
No. And it would be time. It would be immediately time to study.
Yeah.
It would be time to study and or call a peer.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't even have to be like that far off the beaten track. Like I'll tell you one thing that I'm not going to say I struggled with, but has been different for me is because I, like you mentioned how we've done all these different genres and stuff. It was funny. Last night I was bored going through my phone and I found all this Norah Jones stuff that I had done. I'm just listening on my phone. I'm like, God, that sounds amazing. And it's just all just so good. But for me, coming from rock and roll, where it's guitar centric, and then finding myself so deeply entrenched in R&B pop music where it's keys centric. Yeah. Just simply like that shift. Yeah. Of be like, no, man, no. I know what you want. I know what your heart wants. It's for that guitar to be louder. I'm telling you, that's not the move right now. That's not what the client wants. That's not, no one's rooting for what you're rooting for. shift it. And that's been a big one for me of making like keys the predominant thing. But good Lord, let alone here's Indian music. Or I mentioned during COVID, since we've been doing this show, I had an outdoor performance one time, and it was a cello and it was a weird assortment of instruments. It was like a cello, a mandolin, and a blah, 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 blah. It was only like 4 or 5 pieces, but it was like, man, that was the hardest mix I've done in a long time. And you would think, okay, well, the cello's the anchor. Well, it wasn't, and it wanted to feed back the whole time. Like it was, so
that's a hard thing. Like, what happens when you show up to a quartet or whatever, and there's no instruments that's making any sort of low end? The human ear wants to hear the frequency spectrum across the hearing spectrum. So if you don't have information that's at 100 or lower, all of the high end stuff sounds brittle and abrasive and all of those kind of things. So I've run into several situations where I'm like, there is not one instrument here that's making anything below 200, let's say. And so what do you do in that kind of a situation? I know for me, I tried to manufacture a little bit of it, just enough to have something down there, to try to give it something to hold on to, like taking whatever it was, the cello, and, boosting some of those frequencies that just aren't there really.
Right.
To try to manage that. It's a hard thing. Have you run into that situation?
Yeah, it's like, you low end, and let's say it's just an acoustic performance of some sort, whatever the instrumentation might be. So it's not the kind of show where people are really going to be getting down, so to speak.
Right.
But, when there is movement in the low frequencies, it inherently makes people move. It makes them bob their heads. It makes for this, I don't know, it sets the vibe and it sets the mood. And when it's gone, it's very easy to end up with whatever your audience size is. Let's say it's 10 people, let's say it's 10,000 people, of people just standing watching. And that can be very disconcerting as a mixer, to see no one moving or reacting. And
pop stars don't like that either, right?
Well,
how come no one was doing anything? Yeah.
Right. And it's like, so if it's acoustic, you're like, okay, well, I'll rely on the rhythm.
Right.
To serve as what I wish the low end was doing. And it's like, okay, well, whose rhythm? Because I got 2 acoustics, and I got that mandolin guy that's all over the place, and choose one. And they're live players, and if they're mic'd, they might be all over the place. If it's a pickup, it might be wildly dynamic, way more than what you would prefer. So you really are just, and at that point in time too, you're just doing your best to, like, I don't want to say just get through it, but it is kind of a mystery of sorts. You're like, okay, like you said, what's important. What matters? Of course, it all matters, but what's the anchor? That can be very, very difficult.
You mentioned acoustic guitar, and I find that instrument and acoustic piano to really be the 2 instruments in my world that are like, this is difficult to get a good sound out of them.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, I will say probably maybe 3 acoustic guitars in my career have been, dude plugs in, steps up, plays a chord, and I go, whoa, that is a great sounding acoustic guitar. And I've had hundreds of acoustic guitars, you know what I mean? It's like, so for some reason, that instrument in itself just never sounds great and is always a difficult thing. So when you show up to a thing where there's 3 acoustic guitars that don't sound great, and a fiddle player that's wanking all around the microphone, that's a super difficult thing.
It's challenging. I'm glad you said acoustic piano. I keep in my phone with me at all times. This is funny. And I know where the positioning is, yet I keep it in my phone. And then I have it a few different places in the cloud. I think it's on like Google Drive. I'd have to go search for it. And I think I have like a website, but I have it everywhere, piano mic. And I do the same thing. And it used to always be, it could be any mic, but I really like 414s.
Yep.
And it's this gaff tape scenario that I do. The ever popular with us DPA 4099s also do this with much easier mounting. But it's like, that's one, because that's another situation where you end up with a acoustic piano. I'm talking about acoustic grand.
Acoustic grand piano is what I'm talking about too.
Yeah. Also note to do with an upright, that's a little different. But it's like, that's another scenario where if they're doing it there, it's probably I don't want to say hoity-toity affair, but there's something classy about it that's making that be. So like, don't show up like an idiot and not know what to do. Totally. And not look like all you can do is put a 57 in front of an amp. Yeah. So, and again, hear us guys, we're saying, we all know, I know how to point microphones at something and capture sound. We're talking about live sound. We're talking about doing it and it not feeding back. That's if you're just tuning in for the first time, that's the rub. It's going to end up in wedges in the house, everything else. How do you do it? And man, I've got a little system that works so well for me, and it typically ends up just being a couple, it's piano left, piano right. I high pass them probably the same, and I might do slightly different EQ on either side, and then they go to the group and I process the group, and I put the mics in the same place every time, but I keep that with me. That's one I don't want to fuck up.
Yep.
And I need to mention this. I think I've mentioned on here at the show before, but when Lady Gaga started doing her jazz stuff with Tony Bennett, that gave me, I was still with her full time at the time, and that gave me the opportunity to be around Tom Young, who had done Frank Sinatra for like 143 years and had been doing Tony Bennett for another 187 years. So this guy, and I was a sponge, and I learned so much from watching. And I'll be honest with you, the phrasing is what he didn't do. I watched how much in those genres, it's all about the not minimal effort, but minimal production, and just really letting it be sound reinforcement, and you don't want to hear big dramatic mix moves. You don't want to be doing dramatic EQ. And that was a big learning lesson for me, is watching him do his thing. And I've taken that with me. And whenever I'm tasked with doing jazz, or anything similar to that, I use all of those techniques.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's an interesting thing you brought up, is that some of these genres that we're talking about are truly sound reinforcement. They're not designed to be record mix time. Nope. All you're designing to do is to make what's coming off of the stage be louder, right? Yep. That's purest sound reinforcement. And when you're talking about jazz, often that is the deal. Like they don't want a cracking snare drum, a cracking kick drum. They want the big picture of that drum kit, further away room kind of vibe, with that drum kit. And so
and an SPL too, that like we've talked on here before. I love a show where the audience is like, you started with the Kiss thing, where the audience is like enveloped in it, like it's all around you, it's all encompassing. No, it's a show that's occurring there on the stage.
Yeah.
And you need to mix accordingly for that. That's something else to point out.
Well, that's true. And that's a really great discussion too. The SBL of different genres, and also knowing who you're mixing to. I was talking to David Morgan, and he mixed Debbie Gibson early on in his career. And the people, Debbie was like 18, and the kid, he said there was like infants showing up to those shows.
Yeah.
And so the guy before him got fired because the guy was mixing it like a rock show, and there were 6-year-olds in the audience, right? Like, dude, you don't mix a 102 rock show for 6-year-olds and their parents. No. Like, come on, man. So he said, that's why he ended up getting that gig and with her for years and years, is because he was appropriately mixing at an appropriate volume. That's something to discuss too.
Yeah. That's true. That would be a tough one to be handed, because you think about it, you've got, all those 6-year-olds are screaming at the top of their lungs. That's what he said. So you're just like, what the hell do you just, it's kind of like what we both think. I would think, my guess would be, it would be like what you and I experienced with the Bieber thing,
100%.
Where you just endure it for X number of minutes or songs until they quiet enough, and then you find your place there.
I think we've said this a lot. Bring the audience to you.
Yeah.
Don't try to compete with 112 A-weighted screamers.
No.
You're never going to win. You're never going to win, and it's just going to sound ridiculous, and it's going to sound stupid loud. You're not going to win. And so one of my favorite things to do is to force them to like calm down.
Right. Yeah.
By bringing them to me, you know?
Absolutely.
And then you can then mix dynamically and give them something. You know, when you bring them to you at 100 or 102 dBA weighted, when they were screaming at 112, when you bring them to you at 100, you can then give them a 104 punch in a chorus that knocks them all off their feet, and then makes your mix feel bigger, right?
Yeah, yeah, and also kind of gives them, that's almost like their little whoa. That is not like that becomes their whoa moment.
Their whoa moment, yeah, totally.
I talked to I have a couple buddies of mine who play in this one band that I mix, and they met each other they both played in Branson, Missouri, which if you guys aren't familiar with what happens in Branson, Missouri.
Jolly World or whatever's going on there.
Yeah. Well, she might have a presence there, but that's the ultimate blue hair circuit.
Yeah.
Among other things. And I think like no show there is over.
Oh man.
Definitely nothing comes anywhere close to 100.
No, nowhere near 100. Yeah.
Nowhere near.
90 is like pretty standard. Yeah.
Right. So you think about what that is. And I'll tell you something here's a good kind of veer, something that I have thought about. I've been thinking about, I've thought about this for years, but it came up recently in my mind too. You know, something that's really hard to do is to make like earthy, vibey, like, let's say like a Rhodes that's all really low, mid, heavy, or a big bombastic bass drum from some indie rock record. That sound, when amplified live, oftentimes equals pure mush.
Yeah.
There's no artistry, there's no tone. Everything that's cool and vibey and warm about it is just inaudible shit live. That's another tough one too, is when you get a whole bunch, when you get that, whether it's indie rock or whatever it is, you know what I'm talking about. You know the sounds I'm talking about.
Dude, yeah. So that, you know, we've talked about earlier on in a lot of our videos, talked about how that 80 to 250 range in your mix is like often the most difficult thing to get right. Well, what happens when you show up and there's all these instruments that are in that range? Right. Because, you know, that's typically an indoor room. That's what energizes, is all that information. And so when you put a group of instruments together, or even just a single one that's up front in your mix, that has a lot of that information in it, man, that's tough. Like, how do you get the intelligibility part of that instrument to punch, but yet keep the coolness of the instrument, yet not energize that energy in a room? That's like a real skill, man. Do you have any tips to get around it?
Well, I can tell you what I'm inclined to do is simply turn it up. And then we used to get, it's like, but then at a certain point you don't want to go too loud with it. But if you take,
so you're removing some of the frequencies that are really energizing the room, whatever those are, that are the offensive frequencies. You're removing some of those and then turning the overall thing up.
You're just right. You're just at a certain point, you have to give it presentation. Right. You have to push it forward, and everybody out there knows what I'm talking about. I mean, think like a cool, even some, okay, we'll talk about something, even like a Zeppelin drum sound.
Sure.
Even a roomy, natural drum kit that's super vibey and super cool. If you try to replicate that live, depending on where you are, it might just come out pure mush.
Totally.
And while I'm not advocating for the Lars Ulrich mix by default, there's something to be said for that stuff on the top end to help you see what's below it. So what happens is, when I do end up in those scenarios where I've got these real vibey sort of piece, is I just try to see how loud I can get it before it becomes inappropriate. I will also, I know we
awesome.
I know we harp on the benefits of harmonic distortion, but there's a reason. I will employ some form of harmonic distortion. So if the fundamental of that instrument is sitting at 250, we generate some friends on top, and we're going to trick the ear to following those and hope that paints the picture. You know,
that's a great example. I got to tell you, I've been working on some projects here, doing some mixing, and I was struggling with vocals. Like all the vocal in this mix sounded good, but it just it didn't fit anywhere in the pocket. Like, you know, in relation to the rest of the instruments, it just didn't feel right. And I couldn't, you know, I tried EQ, tried compression, tried all kinds of shit. And eventually the client actually suggested this, that putting, you know, that Manny American Drive plugin, that Drive
I like
plugin.
that plugin.
I do too. And I was like, oh yeah, right. Let's add some harmonic distortion to the vocals and see what happens. And dude, I got to tell you, it was like, wow, that fixed everything. Like I was like, okay, so now it's in the track. It's where it's supposed to be. So often harmonic distortion is the fix for things, for sure.
Right. You know, in all of this too, it just goes back to the whole, have a toolkit, because in the last 10 minutes, we've gone from don't do shit, but barely turn it up for the jazz gig, which is true. Like let it be whatever. Don't put any top end on it. Just turn it up until there's a presence.
Yeah.
Hopefully with the jazz cats, there's a note there too. That's what's different between like a rock kit or something else. For me, I'll try not to use the spot mics. I'll try to just use the overheads. Right. You know, we've gone from doing that. Ideally, you're just using hot filtering to putting Manny Marroquin's, you know, distortion plug. And that's just and it's the same art. It's the same art. It's just knowing what's appropriate when and how and in what doses. And it's definitely tough early on when you don't have the skills, right? You're like, oh, I don't know how to fix this. And I'll tell you what becomes tough is so you're young, you don't have the toolkit, or you just learned how to do one thing really well. Yeah. You've learned how to make a snare drum sound like a record. You've learned how to make a kick drum. You've learned how to make a bass guitar actually be heard. You've learned how to do all these things. You've actually learned a vocal delay, and then you get thrown. And this is where there's value in working for a regional company or a club or whatever, where you're just throwing all this other shit, and then you're given these tasks where it's like, okay, and you can use none of those. I'll make it work. But so what's tough, for you and I, is I want to tell you I do what's right by the gig every single time. Like we're saying here, I listen. Whatever the gig is, I listen to the material, I figure out what it is, and that's what I try to nail. I would also like to think that I have, and we've talked about this, a bit of a sound of my own. Yeah. But be careful how much of that you bring with you, because what you do so well might be totally inappropriate for this new gig.
That's really interesting. So I was going to bring this up earlier, but it's so the pop world has kind of adopted all of us rock mixers. Right. And the reason is that a lot of these pop guys live want it to be a rock show. You know, the reason that Ariana Grande hires Toby Francis is because she wants it. You know, her audience is young, but she still wants that, you know, all the impact of drums, and, you know, she wants it to be like a rock show. And that's how he continues to thrive there. And that's how, you know, I've gotten a lot of my pop gigs. It's you know, people know that I'm a rock mixer, primarily have been all of my life. And they want to bring some of those things to the pop genre, not all of it, like you said, with the guitar, right? They don't want the guitars. Guitar. Yeah,
that's the one that I wish they would give us.
But Well, I mean, that is so weird, isn't it? That yes, guitar is not the fundamental instrument in pop music. It's not the one that should be so far forward. But haven't you found that almost every guitar sound in pop music is always dude, your sound is horrible.
Yes.
It's coming out of some direct head.
Yes.
dude, if you think that you belong in the mix,
I know.
like your sound should be good, right?
I know. And it's the worst when you get that sound. I know what you're talking about. It's usually some like badly overdriven, not the sound of tubes, not the sound of like tasteful overdrive, but some bad like rat pedal gone wrong, but a digital emulation of.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, especially nowadays, with and I'm not going to say like with those darn fractals and those darn Kempers, those things.
No, because you can get a good result from those.
You totally can, but there's so much in there, and they use it all. And I got to be honest with you, my brief limited experience in the house of worship world this year, or we'll just pretend it's all the same year. You see it all the time. Everyone is just behind this wall of like, what? How do you ever expect to come forward in the mix? And so it's so frustrating. You've got this sound which by its nature is just smeary and in like reverse, so to speak, and you can't push it per the wishes of the act. So all it is this destructive gnat that lives in the mix.
And then my favorite one is when there's 12 of those.
Right.
Like,
you're like, oh, I'm gonna pan them. Cool. Yeah. So I just get to put them everywhere.
Why does I mean, you know, I'm not a big house of worship mixer, but I've done a few gigs, and every time I show up, there's like 6 guitar players. Like, why is that happening?
I know.
And they're all playing the same part too. It's not like they're playing different parts.
Same part. And now with the church world being the same as everything else in live audio, and there's tracks. You know, which the part
tracks of guitar,
tracks of guitar that are also swamped out and all this stuff. Yeah. So
I feel you out there, man. House of worship guys, I feel you. It's
absolutely. I tell you, I am. First of all, I'm in a hotel and I just found the lever on my chair that makes it go lower. So let me come back up.
All right, there you go.
What was it? One of the last like kind of real gigs, and I don't mean like one particular show, but an artist that I've teamed up with for a little while. I don't know if I'll ever work with him again now. I have no idea what's going to happen. But God, you know, this guitar thing, it's like, I'm just thinking about these songs we did that were like these big, huge soaring intros into the beginning with this huge, it is a guitar solo. It's not my interpretation.
Right.
But it's a guitar. That's what's happening at that moment. Yet it's like her people were like, turn the guitar down, turn the guitar down. I'm like, no, he's literally like,
that's what's happening.
He has the ball right now.
Right.
What the fuck am I
supposed to? He's running down the field.
He is. What do you want me to do? And you sit there, and that's where you got it. Just like when Ron Delsner or Steve Wynn or whoever comes up with the comment, you just got to sit there and do it.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Like, I know this isn't right. Musically, I know music is an art and it's all to each their own, whatever. There are rules to a certain extent, you know, and you just have to sit there and be like, okay, but this doesn't sound right. This doesn't feel right.
You know, and that's the whole other one that we filmed earlier about the political side of this. Like, know who's important.
Yeah.
Like, you got to know when I showed up to Steve Wynn's hotel with his it's his New Year's party. Yeah. My client is Katy Perry, but he's important too. Like, you got to listen to what he says too.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a whole other side of this for sure. What about, we've been talking about genres. Maybe we talk a little bit more about specific instruments. Like, what are some of the weirdest instruments you've run into? Like, you know, I showed up at a gig and there was like a dude playing a dulcimer, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what to do with that. And so there was, and also like, I had no idea what microphone to use on a dulcimer, you know?
Right.
And so it was definitely like, hey man, can you play acoustically for me? I need to hear what your instrument sounds like. And then hopefully go back to the mic drawer and have a tool to get what you need.
Yep.
But has there been any weird ones for you?
I mean, there've been a ton, as I'm sure we're both going to think of more. It's funny. I think on the last episode you mentioned dulcimer, and I literally, when it was over, or maybe while we were talking, I'm like, wait, which one's the dulcimer? You know, I have to remember. And I'll run into that with same scenario. Again, I'm making myself look like a dumbass in this one, but when it gets into orchestral stuff, There's I'm like, wait, which one is that?
That's a hard one, dude.
Is that the one in the middle? Is that the,
that's an interesting thing that you bring up too, that we didn't talk about in regards to orchestra, was what sections are important. The first violins are playing a part and the second violins are playing a part. Who's more important in that moment? Theoretically, the conductor is the guy with the overall picture and is asking for more of the, second violins more. But when you're close miking,
right,
that's a hard, you're making that decision.
You're making that decision. And everything in life, particularly in life as it pertains to live audio, is not apples to apples. They're not, the first might not be giving you the output that the second is. And you're trying to be super neutral and you're trying to play it right, but you're getting more output. But it's like, well, but they're set the same. And it's just like, no.
Yeah.
It's
difficult and you have to study, you really do.
You do. But as you were talking, I was grinning. Now, this was not difficult at all. Difficult, when I think of live sound, if you ask me difficult, particularly the first place my mind goes to, the most difficult things are the ones that are the most prone to feedback.
Yep.
It's an acoustic piano that is in front of the PA that it's live mic'd, or it's something like that, or
wedges on stun, or
it's stuff like that. That's
Elton John, his wedges are on stun.
Yes, right. So something famously, in our industry, something like that, where it's just like, oh, I'm glad I don't have to go near that.
Yeah.
But this particular thing is a good example of, it wasn't difficult to achieve the sound, but I had to listen to these cats and let them tell me how they do it and go, okay, when I'm with these guys, this is what we do. And it was, God help me, but there was a period of time where I was really involved in a lot of New Orleans based stuff. That's a whole world unto itself, how they do things. And a lot of times New Orleans does things what a lot of people might think is kind of like little backwards, a little slack, a little this, but that's part of the vibe, and do that because that's how it works. And it's not a tuba. Is it a bassoon? Whatever the
smaller version of a tuba.
Yeah. Whatever those cats play down there in the jazz bands and the bands on the corner.
I know what you're talking about. And the name is escaping me right now.
Bands in the corner, or in the quarter, all those cats, they do, what I think is, okay, we're going to clip something onto, and right there, boom, there we go. That's not what they do. They take a 58, they wrap it in a towel, and I don't even mean to where the head of the mic, the capsule, is like, no, it's in the towel, and then they drop it in the motherfucker, and then they gaff or duct tape. There's no gaff tape. Yeah, they tape it at the top, and that's what they do. Wow. Now, mind you, by doing that, of course, again, that's not hard. You're going to get all the output in the world. But it was like, that was one, when I started encountering those guys, I was like, you want me to do what?
That's crazy, dude.
And I just learned that that's what you did. And I listened to them, and that's what we did. As far as other instruments, it would be some acoustic instrument of some sort where one person tells you to mic it at the F hole.
Yeah.
The other person tells you to point it at the bridge. Yeah. The player wants it over their shoulder. Ultimately, I just need output. Yeah. Those are the ones that stick out as difficult for me.
Often for us, it's all about gain before feedback, right? So that's what we're looking for. It may not necessarily be actually the best sounding place of that instrument. No. Unfortunately. But we're looking for some sort of balance there, still good sounding, but way more gain. I'm not going to have to worry about gaining this up so hot that all I'm doing is creating feedback. Yeah, man, that's tough.
What about you? What's throwing you for a loop?
Like I said, that dulcimer thing did. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
And at the end of the day, what was that? 12th fret? Or, something?
I honestly can't remember what I did.
Yeah.
It was literally 20 years ago, and I can't remember what I did. But it was definitely one of those things where I was talk to the guy and hey, where's the best place to mic this thing? I struggle with acoustic guitars sounding shitty. That's like, you know, I run into that a lot. I really
it's
do.
The worst.
Like,
it's the worst, hands down. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So, you know, because of the some acoustic guitars that are played acoustically and are used in recording studios are the most amazing sounding guitars in the world. But as soon as you put a pickup on it and plug it in to try to get that gain before feedback that we're talking about, and also the, you know, get away from the whole movement thing, because they're going to be moving away from a microphone, you know, all of those things that we need to overcome in live sound. As soon as you put a, you know, and I've tried all kinds, you know, they all have these super duper pickups that do combine a mic and a pickup. And it's just like, oh man,
I know.
And it's so difficult. And I want that instrument to sound amazing, right? Like I want it to be big and full and fat and, you know, that amazing acoustic sound that you hear on some like country records, for instance. And that's just, sometimes you just can't get that.
And you know what sucks about that too is that is one of the good sounding acoustic guitar, of which there are, just like electric guitars, a million varieties of what is a good sounding acoustic guitar. It's a true joy of audio to listen to when it's on a record. I mean, it's rich, or it could be any number of things, or gosh, it could be the 80s and it could be chimey and chorus filled and whatever, but
still cool, right? You know, and big frequency spectrum wise, it's big, like it covers, you know,
in all the best ways. And to not be able to replicate that despite your best efforts, and to have the vision of where you want to take it, becomes one of those moments where you just want to go to everybody in the audience and be like, I know.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Earlier when we were talking, I was thinking about when you're talking about what do you do when there's not low end presence, you know, and how do you kind of generate that energy, or maybe fake low end, or do whatever. I started thinking about when, let's say, there are acoustic guitars involved. Acoustic guitars are one of those things in a dense mix, much like a piano or a keyboard patch replicating a piano. My high passes get up there because I don't need the chunk. I don't need the woof. I don't need any of it. However,
that's interesting. Let me interrupt you real quick. That is, when I was speaking about what's hard about acoustic guitars, it's when they're by themselves.
It's when they're by themselves. And it's the same thing holds true for piano or piano patches or acoustic guitars, whether mic'd or DI'd, is when they're by themselves, guys, drop that high pass. Like drop. It's particularly like I've got a bunch of acts I work with where there's a piano all night long, or he's playing a bunch of patches, but it's predominantly piano. And then it becomes ballad time. If you don't drop that high pass, and I mean play the console or automate it or do whatever you got to do, if you don't, you will have this anemic, passionless performance. And it really sucks. But here's the problem.
Here's the rub.
Much like we talk about uneven bass notes out of a bass guitar, a lot of times what's the thing everyone plays? The Yamaha, gosh, of course my mind just went. The motif. The motif out of the box has the most unrealistic, you know, 100 and down boost you've ever heard, because it sounds amazing in the headphones when you're demoing it at Guitar Center. It's just bigger than life.
Hype into it.
They build the hype. You often talk about hype. That's hype. But the second you open that up in a PA, even the best of tuned PAs, suddenly you've got, when they go low and you just want it to sustain and be cool, you get this woof that doesn't exist in music.
That's right.
But if you have a PA that's not the best tuned PA, now it's double bad. So that becomes just as hard as anything in the world, is when you open up the high, or drop the high pass, open up the low end on those sources, is what's coming back at you. And this is when we do get into shelf EQ or multiband or dynamic EQ or something to
expansion and compression.
That's when we get into that kind of stuff. So that stuff's really hard when you reintroduce low end to those sources, because a lot of times it's not the best sounding low end in the world. You know, and if it's mic'd If it's a mic'd piano or a mic'd guitar, now we're right back into feedback of the sort that, like, buildings crumble. So,
oh man. Well, I think we've kind of come to the end of this discussion, but it's been pretty awesome talking about, different genres. Hey guys, don't forget about our podcast. We put up all 40 of our episodes, and this is 43. So anyway, we're going to be one episode off with our podcast. So when 41 posts on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to access episode 40 on the podcast. But a lot of you guys were requesting the podcast thing, and we're super stoked to do it. So all of your podcast friendly places like Apple and Spotify and all that, it's there. So go check it out.
Yep. And if you're so inclined, leave us a rating, leave us a review.
Yeah.
We're in a sea of podcasts now. It'd be good to get a little, let everybody know that this one's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, in this world, in social media, likes and subscribes and all of that stuff matter. So tell your friends, and we're hoping that you're digging this. All right, guys. Well, take care, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you, everybody.